Hey, hello, welcome back. This is Thomas Hampo and would like to welcome you back to the second episode of the Domino v14 Deep Dive webinar series. Today, it's about security, and all things security are being discussed in a minute. Before we start going into details, I just want to highlight a few logistical details here. First, the tool that you're using, the platform you're using, allows to raise a question, and we have a whole set of supporting units, supporting people, helping you out with answering those questions, helping us out with answering those questions. So please be so kind and put your question into the chat. Of course, we are going to record this webinar and it will be made available later on well-known video platforms, and also slides will be available. All right, so let's get started. The voice you just heard is mine. My name is Thomas Hampel. I'm the product manager for the Domino family. And today I'm joined by a colleague from our security team, Dave Kern. Dave, just want to say hello to the audience.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is David Kern. I'm the Domino Security Group's resident paranoid, etc., etc., etc.
Well, thanks for this small introduction. Behind the scenes, maybe speaking or maybe not speaking today is, of course, the whole product management team and more folks from the development team. So let's dig into the slides. I can find the right button to move on. Again, this slide deck may contain forward-looking information. You know to be careful with that. As I said in the beginning, this is stage 2 of our series of webinars. We are diving deep into all things of the Domino server security. There are more webinars in the following weeks, same time being up next, and then further down the road, more topics that are of your interest. I'm going to share a QR code later on so that you can put those events on your calendar and invite your friends to join. Now, this is about Domino server security. So where are we going to start? I think the best to start with is with a level set on what you should have enabled by now. In terms of security, I think as of today, you are a good citizen if you are running a Domino server in version 12.02, FP2, well, preferably FP2, soon expect 3, or even version 14. You should have NRPC port encryption enabled. You should, of course, enable SSL TLS everywhere, of course, using the new certificate manager that we introduced in Domino 12. Of course, you should be running a supported operating system version. Please check that, especially on the Linux side of things. That should be, you should take a little bit of attention, should spend a little bit of attention on that one. Also, we recommend running transactional logging, Deus Tier 1. Symmetrical clusters is a great feature to run. And of course, if you're using Domino in a mail environment, enable DKIM and SPF that we introduced recently. An ID vault or having an ID vault is a given. And in that, you should check whether the ID file encryption strength of your nodes ID files is set to 256-bit AES, preferably with a SHA-512 hash. Key strength being 2480 bits. And when it's about passwords, there is a whole discussion on how to simplify authentication to Domino. And the trend here is to get away from a traditional HTTP password and instead enable password checking against the ID vault. This is all details, or these are all features you can already have by now. You can have them enabled. There's plenty of information out there to configure the various details of those features. Today, we are going to take a more closer look into the Domino version 14 security benefits. So to some extent, that's going to be a deep dive into a specific area. We are not going to cover the entire capabilities of Domino. For that, the 1 hour of time that we were given for this webinar will by far not be enough. So Dave, why don't we start with a little bit of a level set on what is security?
Thanks, Thomas. So whenever someone asks me to talk with them about security, I have to ask, what do you actually mean when you say security? Because security means many different things to many different people. A auditor or a process manager might be talking about audits and attestation. If you're dealing with a hosted environment, you need to worry about separation of duties, compliance, penetration testing, evidence retention. But if you go to a technical person or a cryptographer, they'll start talking about authentication, authorization, data integrity and privacy, signing, and all of the gory details that the rest of the security universe builds on. In this presentation, I'm not going to try to cover the entire swath of information here. I'm going to focus on the very first bullet on the slide, authentication. So next slide, please.
We may have a little bit of a delay switching slides, so bear with me. There you go.
Okay. But ultimately, all of those different aspects of security come down to twisting your brain 90 degrees to the left and viewing the world from a slightly different perspective. When you're looking at a house, before you leave on vacation, you don't just lock your front door and walk off. You go check and make sure that the basement door is locked, and you check to make sure the windows are locked. But have you ever considered in late December the chimney vulnerability that Santa Claus uses to descend through a narrow 6-inch wide pipe and drop himself in the middle of your house right next to all of those expensive presents? I mean, that should be concerning, right? A person sneaking down the street with a mask pulled over their head and a crowbar is clearly a thief who's up to no good. But what about someone in a contractor's hard hat, a high vis vest, and a sawzall? And a battery-powered sawzall can cut through the exterior wall of a house in no time flat. Throw a little sign up in the front of the lawn saying, company X is doing work, go to our website for details. And, police officers will drive right down the house while you're busily evacuating all of the contents of said house through a hole you just cut in the wall. So you really need to think about the world in a slightly different manner in order to handle security. But when we're focusing on authentication, there are two pieces that most folks seem to ignore. I mean, authentication needs to be simple. We've all seen horrible password dialogues where you're expected to generate long passwords that are composed of all sorts of arbitrary requirements. Oh, this system wants 3 control characters, and that one needs a backslash, but it doesn't like the number 1, but you can put the number of 6 in instead. And yeah, it's just a really bad situation. So let's go to the next slide and get even more depressed, shall we?
Or I was just about to outline the chapter down there, which is a bit of a joke. That authentication dialogues are making it really, really hard to provide a pleasant user experience with multiple dialogues, and really, as a user, you're quite disappointed.
Yeah, many folks in in the IT industry as a whole seem to believe that security means complicated, that security means hard, that the more obstacles you throw in a user's path, the more dialogues you throw in their face, the more actions and clicks that you make them go through, the more secure your system is. In fact, all you're doing is inspiring your users to find ways to work around your Qt solutions, ways to, cut and paste dialogues from a background image on their screen, or there are many ways around some of the most convoluted mechanisms. We want life to be simple. But okay, authentication, that's a small topic, right? Well, not really. What I have here is a very small number of mechanisms here. On the left, we have, a pile of different protocol level authentication techniques, ranging from authentication within the TCP/IP protocol that makes the internet go, up through obscure mechanisms that are used in, little narrow niche cases. But when we're generally talking about authentication in these days, we're talking about HTTP application level authentication. That's your user dialogues. That's your one-time code sent through one mechanism or another. You have push notifications. You have session cookies in order to maintain that authentication state with a server, rather than going through a lot of work over and over again. You have federated identity through SAML or OIDC, and passkeys down here at the end. So many of these all rely on passwords, and passwords are evil. It is my mission to try to stomp on passwords. We want to kill passwords. We want to eradicate passwords. Many administrators think that the right way to make passwords more secure is to prevent users from saving them in keychains, to force users to type them in by hand every single time. And by the way, that needs to be a different password for each website, and you need to change it every 30, 60, or 90 days, which means you need to remember a dozen different 20-character passwords just to do your daily business. And people's brains don't work like that. We can't remember those passwords. And even if we could, computers are far better at guessing passwords than we are at remembering them. So many of these rules of thumb that everyone follows just as a matter of habit or as a matter of policy, dating back to someone reading a Wired article back in the 1980s, are sort of wretched counter patterns that we need to rid ourselves of.
And we all know the weakest link in this game is the end user, due to reusing passwords, due to shoulder surfing, keylogging, and the like. So is there anything we can do about it?
So the first step here is don't authenticate to each and every backend server. Federate those login to a single centralized identity provider. The old classic standard here is SAML. If you're interested in it, you know about it, you're probably using it. You have a provider that's hooked up to a central corporate IT system that's managed by a team. And the Domino side of the house might not even have direct access to those systems. The new standard is OIDC, and whereas SAML was very web browser centric, it was really designed for an end user in a web browser to connect to a website. OIDC works well in a OAuth 2.0 environment because it's built on top of that OAuth framework. So it connects well with bearer authentication. It works well with mobile apps and native apps and single page apps, and a web server connecting to a different backend resource. Lighter weight than SAML, easier to use, and it's what you see behind most of those social media login buttons. But there are problems. Yeah, but there are problems in both of these. Configuration is hard, and interoperability is iffy, and you can't federate everything because politics gets in the way. So let's say that you have a corporate identity provider run by a central IT team, and they guard that ferociously. How do we actually get a new application or a test application or a dev application integrated with that provider? You can't. You might need to create a ticket that will lurk in the background for 6 months before someone bothers looking at it and rejecting it because they're afraid to touch that Azure AD infrastructure. If we blow on it too hard, it'll explode, or two managers are sniping at one another, so you don't get your federated identity. So guess what? Users have yet another password to remember.
Mm. And by the way, Dave, I'm getting pinged by various people that some of the slides aren't showing up on time. At least certain areas, it's well timed, but in other areas, the slides are taking a few seconds longer to switch from one to the other.
All right. I will attempt to delay then.
No, that's just fine. I guess people in those areas may need to refer to the recording. So just go on.
But in the best case where all of this works and you can configure federated identity, each implementation supports a different subset of the standard. So you need to hope that you have an intersection between two implementations so you can actually set things up. Each implementation is configured differently. So you might need to refer to 4 different manuals to configure 4 different services in 4 different ways. Which makes that configuration a real nightmare. You might need different configurations when your identity provider for those different services, just because they don't all support the same subset of the standard. And finally, you're probably still connecting to that identity provider with a password, and passwords are still evil, even if you have fewer of them.
But there is hope.
Yes, we have a new hope. So
the hope are called passkeys. Why passkeys is outlined on the next slide. While we may not cover all these boxes in detail, I think we want to highlight some of the real benefits here on why the audience should really look into passkeys when they deploy a v14 server.
So my favorite one here is from the user experience standpoint on making end users' lives easier so they don't try to circumvent all of your controls. Is passkeys are innately multi-factor. It is something you have, the secure hardware, and something you are or something like biometrics or a PIN to unlock that secure hardware, which means instead of having a user fill in a username and a password and then grab their phone, unlock their phone, flip to find the right page, find the right folder, open the app, use Touch ID to open the app, scroll down, find the right TOTP code, and type it in. You can just use passkey autofill, and one touch and bang, the user is logged in, and they've logged in with that same level of multi-factor security that they had with the 12-step process that took them a couple minutes to complete.
And I think the end user convenience is really the best of it. I mean, from a mathematical point of view, from the security that's built into the passkey concept, you really get the best of breed, but without the hassle and without the headaches of end users having to remember any form of passwords. Also, since passkeys are not transferred over the wire, there is nothing that can be intercepted. There is no passkey that you can sniff on the network. Also, the server you're logging into doesn't have any form of hashed version of your password. It's all encryption and mathematics that takes place here, pretty much like what we have in the Domino world, with a public key stored on the server side and your private key being stored in your nodes ID. Imagine passkeys to be like that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I mean, I think we have lots of words, lots of text here on this slide, but the easiest is to see it live. I've prepared a small demo that we already showed in the Domino v14 launch webinar. I need to say that the demo is built for a scenario where a user wants to log in to, for instance, a kiosk computer, a computer that he has never used before. So in this case, I'm using my smartphone, which screen is shared here on the right-hand side, and I'm logging on to a kiosk computer where the screen share is shown on the left. Domino has been configured for passkey authentication, and I've paired my phone with that site. So all I have to do is to click on login with passkey, and the operating system of that computer will then prompt me for how you want to log in. So since this kiosk machine doesn't have any identity of mine, it's presenting me with a QR code. And just by pointing my camera at this QR code will establish a connection between the two. I'm just confirming my identity, and voila, I'm logged in. All the magic, all the security did take place in that very second. There was no username that I had to type in, no password that I had to remember. And as you can see, it's really, really convenient from an end user point of view.
And not only is it convenient and fast, but the machine that you're on never gets access to those credentials. The credentials never leave your phone. The phone signs a challenge sent by the server. That signed challenge goes back, and that signed challenge will only be sent to the correct website on the back end. So it's completely immune to the human side of phishing, where a human is tricked into typing in their password into a website that looks the same as the real one, but that's an L instead of a 1.
Yeah, and you don't have to use a smartphone. You can use your computer to store your passkeys, and you can also use specially crafted security keys known as FIDO2 keys or UB keys, but that may be a special scenario. From an end user point of view, the easiest is to use the smartphone. So this is a deep dive webinar, so we don't just want to show what it works like, but we also want to show you how to set it up. So that's why on the next couple of pages, I really detailed what you need to do to set this up. Prerequisite is a Domino v14 server. And of course, you need to have an DNS hostname or a fully qualified DNS name to resolve either the internet site or the server that you want to connect to. We assume you have an internet site properly configured and you have the session authentication set to single server or multi-server SSO. Also, you need to have a current web browser, current as in one of the major browsers that are currently existing in the market space is just fine. From an operating system point of view, macOS or iOS, any current version thereof, and also Windows in version 10 and 11 work just fine. On the Domino server side, we support passkeys on Linux and Windows. And with that being available, what you have to do is, like I said, get your internet site configured and also do the following. Just need to see if me switching slides will result in the screen share updating. So first thing to do is you create a new database, the passkey database. There's a small note here. This file name must be all in lowercase. The template, as usual, is provided with the Domino server. You can encrypt the database, it should, unless you're using cluster symmetry. And if you have the internet site being hosted by more than one server, you need to replicate the passkey database to all the servers hosting that internet site. Next thing is...
So one thing on that database, sorry for jumping in, Thomas, is that because we only have public keys stored in that database, not private keys or secret keys, we don't have passwords hashed or encrypted or otherwise, the access control settings on that database are more important than encrypting it. So someone viewing the database won't be able to steal someone's identity and log in as them. All they can do is, see who has a registered passkey. The preventing other people from changing the database is what really matters. And you can actually use a notes any to change that passkey database name, including placing it in a subdirectory. So if you want to use the new cluster replication, cluster symmetry feature, you can use that notes any to place the passkey database in a subdirectory where it will then be replicated through cluster symmetry.
A few slides further down, I have a list of all nodes inis that apply to passkey and the passkey setup. So that's all provided in the handout. Just for clarity here, an optional step is the choice, or your choice, to configure passkeys to work on more than just one site. And there are two variables that define to which scope the passkeys would be valid for. For instance, there are situations where you not only have an internet site named server 01, but you also may have www.mytest and then followed by the domain extension. So if you want the same passkey to work on both, this is the configuration you can apply.
Yeah.
On the
By
internet,
default, you can still register passkeys for each of those individual sites, and it's perfectly legitimate if you want those sites to be completely independent and users to have to register passkeys separately against each site, go ahead. But if you want a more of an SSO solution where you register a single passkey and then you can use it against a wide range of servers, this is how you do it. You'd configure your passkey domain levels to the right level and replicate the passkey database to all the affected servers. And all of those servers can then use those passkeys.
So once the database has been created, you can update your internet site configuration to enable passkey web out n. As shown here, switch the toggle to yes. The next thing is you want the login form to look like this. And that potentially means you need to change or update the configuration of DOM-CFG or even change the template. DOM-CFG.nsf contains the login forms and the login form mappings. There is a new template that contains the HCL default login form. You may or may not have customized the login form to meet your corporate design guidelines. So the login form that we are providing can be used as a template. You can change it, you can update it, you can add your corporate color coding and logos and the like. But if you want to go with the defaults, then in the DOM-CFG database, you'll need to do some modifications. And for clarity, what we want to have is the login forms shown on the left and not the login forms that are the screenshots of the login forms shown on the right. Those on the right are either very dated or do not have the necessary hooks for using passkeys. So how to do that? Well, clearly it's the DOM-CFG database. Step one is you need to check whether it's using the latest template. The template version is v14 or greater. And then for using a specific login form on your internet sites, you need to create or modify an existing login form mapping, either a mapping that applies to all internet sites or one for each and every specific site. Yeah, and that's already about it. So with that being set up, your end users can start creating passkeys, and those passkeys will result in a new document being created in the passkey.nsf database. The administrator can see the documents in here and can see which user has created a passkey, what the last login time was, and what form of authenticator he did use. So for instance, in the screenshot at the top, look at the very last column. You see the authenticator name. Or when you open up the document, you can also see the details. As Dave mentioned just a minute ago, all those details are just public information. There are public keys and hashes and the like, but there is no private key in here. So don't be afraid of that. Anything to add, Dave?
I think you've covered it. So we don't have mappings for all of the authenticator GUIDs. When someone registers a passkey, most authenticators will send a GUID. That's what you see in the last column there. And in some cases, like that all zeros GUID, we don't know who sent it. And so we will just display the GUID name rather than, mapping it to a friendly name.
Okay, and here, just for completeness, I've listed all the nodes in use that apply to the passkey configuration. Use them when needed, so that's just for completeness. All right, with that, having covered the passkey subject, there is a lot more we can talk about in terms of security. And I think one that really catched some attention was OIDC improvements we did in Domino v14. So Dave, want to go into details here, talking about OIDC and Bera enhancements we did?
Sure. I won't, walk through the slide directly, but we received a great deal of feedback from the during the 1202 early access program, which is what led us to add WebLogin with OIDC in the first place. That wasn't in our initial scope for the release, but that meant that many of the configuration variables we couldn't get into the database. There was no time to add them into IDP-CAT. So that is a significant improvement in 14. The configuration is almost entirely in IDP-CAT, other than a few nitty-gritty low-level changes that didn't seem worthwhile to expose.
Allow me to switch back and forth. Allow me to switch back and forth because I have a screenshot on that one showing the
wonderful
improved UI, so that people can see the configuration no longer needs to be done with nodes inis. You now have a database, an application where you can do your configuration with. Isn't that great?
And so you can also see some of the other enhancements on that screenshot, where you can, in 1202, because the client ID and client secret were configured globally across the entire server, as in notes ini, you could only configure against one provider for WebLogin with OIDC across your entire Domino server. Now, because that information is configured per internet site, per provider document in IDP-CAT, you could have a dozen different internet sites on your server, each connected to, a dozen different OIDC providers, each with their own client ID and client secret. Client authentication type is also a change. 1202 only supported client secret basic authentication and none, but 14 added support for client secret post and my favorite private key JWT, which is the most secure variant. It's essentially using keys to authenticate instead of using passwords to authenticate. So it fits into our theme of eradicating passwords. And we've also added a great deal more support for other providers. So Microsoft did their usual trick with embracing and extending the standards with Azure AD and ADFS. We've added support for their customizations, shall we say, in 14 by checking that Enable Microsoft Workarounds box. And there are, a whole slew of other improvements here that I won't go into. People who are rolling their own providers for bearer authentication, we now only require the issuer and JWKS URI components in the well-known configuration endpoint. And for those people who are, building your own things, building your own server tasks, we have a new API, SecVerify Access Token. So your app that calls this Domino C API on the back end can, acquire access tokens and then validate them against Domino's configured providers and keys. So instead of trying to do everything yourself, you can let Domino do the heavy lifting, configure the trusted provider in IDP-CAT, and just use a single API call to verify if this access token is valid or not.
Oops, did I switch too early?
Nope, we can jump to this one. So the but yeah, this is along those same lines. We had customers who had sort of rolled their own tokens and were upset that in 1202 Domino was actually validating tokens, but Domino couldn't validate their tokens because they weren't valid OIDC tokens. But it turns out that you only really need two things to convince Domino that something is a OIDC provider, and you can convince Domino to serve that trusted configuration to itself. So create a file in the Domino HTTP server with the appropriate, .wellknown/OpenID configuration path. I tend to put mine under a fake provider directory. And it just has the issuer name that you place in those JWTs, and then a JWKS URI that points back to that same internet site. And so now look at the ultraviolet fake provider that we see shown here in the screenshot. that is configured for private key JWT authentication for WebLogin using OIDC, but there's no client secret. You see, the way private key JWT authentication works is that you either need to go through a complicated method of generating a key in one place and saving it in another, and you're back in that old SAML nightmare of trying to get the metadata to match up. And if someone updates a key, the partnerships all fail. OIDC improves that by allowing relying parties to fetch keys dynamically from a published endpoint from the provider. And the provider can also fetch published keys from the relying party. So with private key JWT, Domino, you can place that private key in the client secret field, and Domino will publish that under the off protocol OIDC keys endpoint. With this fakes provider support, you can add the public key that you are that you want Domino to trust for verifying your custom JWT access tokens in the client secret, set the internet site for private key JWT, and now Domino will serve that key to itself in the correct format. So you're using this OpenID configuration to point Domino to a key that Domino is serving to itself. So now Domino can trust that signing key, and it can verify your custom access tokens.
For the sake of time, we cannot cover the detailed configuration of this, and I guess it only applies to specific scenarios, but we are providing you with additional information here on the handout slides, debug parameters, knowledge articles, and the like. That will help you to set this up. I hope that's a good start at least. And in case you need any help, please give our support team a call, reach out to us, and we'll help you out. All right, so thanks, Dave, for talking about OIDC. And by the way, I'm going to fix that typo on the other slide where I mixed up two characters. There's a bit more we need to talk about besides OIDC and passkeys. So now about other improvements, such as Domino 14 providing a cluster-safe single server session cookie. That being in the spirit of getting away from a token that's called LTPA session cookie or LTPA token that's valid for your entire domain. In terms of authentication, you want to have sessions being persistent, and at least in your clustered applications, don't require users to log in again when the sprayer in front of the cluster is routing the session to another server. Dave, want to chime in on the details on what you've encountered so far and the logic behind?
Sure. So when looking at trying to help customers get past using the LTPA cookie, which has many flaws that many of you are aware of, and moving to a single server cookie, one of the big issues was that in a clustered environment, if you had multiple Domino servers serving the same internet site, they would each be emitting the same cookie with that same internet site name. And so server A and server B would step on each other's session cookies. And so you'd end up ping-ponging back and forth with the user being forced to re-authenticate against different servers as they keep slamming each other's session cookie. And so what we have now is a cluster-safe version of that cookie that you can enable with a Notcini, where the name of the cookie has 11 characters, which are determined from the Domino server DN, not the internet site name that it happens to be serving. So that way, if you have a half dozen servers in a cluster that are all serving the same internet site, they will each have different DOM-auth SSID cookie names, and therefore they can all coexist without stepping on each other. The one drawback here is that we disabled the functionality by default because we are well aware that many of you have rules baked into your current sprayers or applications that have the string DOM-auth SSID hard-coded in there. And we wanted to give you guys time to enhance those rules to say, a cookie starting with DOM-auth SSID instead of a cookie that is exactly equal to DOM-auth SSID before we went ahead and flip this switch and turn this on by default.
Okay, thank you. Also, in the spirit of modernizing Domino, we of course have updated the TLS ciphers and declared those ciphers as insecure that no longer meet the technical requirements, the mathematical requirements for a secure cipher. That means to you that you should check your internet site configurations. We've updated the form to make it visible which ciphers should be good to use and any others you should, of course, disable. Also, good news is that in case you're using SameTime, and I hope you do, SameTime is also supporting the current ciphers. So the interconnection between the SameTime environment and the Domino environment for an LDAP lookup and the like can now work with the more secure ciphers. So product being current with that respect. Behind the scenes, we've updated our dependencies. We've talked about this before in one of our webcasts, but just for clarity, OpenSSL and libcurl are two dependencies Domino is using behind the scenes, and we are incorporating more current versions and thereby fixing a number of vulnerabilities in those libraries by just referring to or using the more current versions thereof. If you are interested in what has changed within those libraries, just check these websites. There is plenty of information on the security fixes that were contained in the more current version. Also, we've covered that in the overview webinar already. We've updated our Java engine. The Java virtual machine was updated from Java 8 to version 17. And by that, also providing a number of security fixes. I'm reusing that slide as a reminder that you want to double check on what has changed in between the releases. You want to check your dependencies when you upgrade to version 14. So also in the Java space, watch out for customizations you've done in the JVM security space, or whether you have deployed additional jar files or made specific security configurations to make them work. Other security improvements are, for instance, the ability to now use policy for setting the ID file encryption. In the beginning of this webcast, I mentioned that you can set your nodes ID file to be using AES-256 with SHA-512, but it wasn't possible for an administrator to set this as a requirement in a Domino policy. And with v14, that's now available, so you can upgrade the nodes ID security by making changes to your policy definitions. Also, the internet password, the well-known internet password in the Domino directory, if you still use that for some reason, is using a SHA-256 hash, and so to say, providing a more stronger security for the password hash that's being stored. It's all updated and all used behind the scenes, so nothing specific you have to be aware of. And that's why you should make sure to update your Domino directory template, which of course is part of your upgrade process. And I don't want to forget to mention that, of course, there are a number of CVEs that we have fixed in version 14. They were also backported to 12.02 FP2. If you want to know about the details, read these tech notes, read these knowledge articles for more details, and make sure to apply FP2. I need to go a little bit faster because we want to have at least 5 minutes for Q&A at the very end. So let me point out some changes that are security related, which affect the Domino server installation. One thing, for instance, is when you run Domino on Windows, it has been a common scenario to run Domino with the local system account, basically giving the Domino server full access to the local server. On Windows, that has been the common practice. On Linux, this was not, the Domino server was of course not running with root permissions. It was running with its own user ID. And while you can already run Domino on Windows within a user account, that's really not easy to set up. In v14, we would like to more precisely, more directly go into segregation of duties and clearly to clearly just provide Domino with the access rights it needs to the operating system, and therefore you are running the Domino server with a local service account. If you specify that during the setup of the server, please be aware that this service account also needs to have access to all data directories, especially any directories that may be stored outside of your data directory, maybe on another disk or some other place, like for instance the transaction log, DEOS, full text index, NIF, NSF, and the like. You need to grant permissions to those directories, and there is a command to do that. It's listed down there. The command, you can see there, sets the access rights for a user named S-1-5-19, and that is just the internal representation on a Windows platform for the local service account. Keep that in mind. Please also read additional articles in our knowledge base, test that out in your environment. But clearly, that's being done to separate the access rights that Domino has to your platform versus any other applications on your system. All right, switching gears. The next topic I'd like to mention is inbound disclaimers. It was a request that came in from a number of customers and partners saying we would like to have an indication on emails to mark them as coming from an external source. And this feature is called inbound mail disclaimers, which is the capability to tag or mark external messages when they are received from an internet environment or from another domain. These internet mails or these inbound mails are tagged at the moment when they come into the first server, and the configuration you can set on your own by defining whether the email should be tagged, as in the message subject should be tagged, or whether you want to have a text being added to the mail body, or maybe both. The configuration for this is stored under the configuration document in the router SMTP section, restrictions and controls, inbound controls, and the like. And it allows to specify when to apply that message, in what circumstances, and also allows the text to be defined. The text, as you've seen, can be an HTML text, which allows for color coding, or just plain text as you wish. Keep in mind that the text and the tag are both having length constraints, so don't write excessive long text in here. That may not work. For this feature, we recommend, if you want to use that, we recommend using subject tagging, which means an email that arrives in your inbox can already be identified as coming from an external source because the column subject here, as indicated in green, already contains the tag that you have specified. You can add a tag to the body of a message. The problem with this is if you only update the mail body, then an email in your inbox, they will all look the same, and you need to open the email to make a difference between an internal and an external email. However, in certain customers, it is required, or it is a request to do the message body tagging. If you plan to do that, please be aware of the SPR that's outlined here. Make sure to apply the hotfix that we made available. I'm sure that Dave could add a lot of more details, but I'll need to switch to the last slide before we can get to Q&A, and that is just one smaller feature, but requested by a number of customers that have configured the Notes client to use federal login. So for those that are not aware of that, the Notes client can be configured against a federal login, meaning instead of typing your Notes ID file password, you are providing your ADFS credentials, for instance. Now, it was requested to make NFL mandatory and not provide the ability to back out, and that can now be used in the v14 client by setting the Notes ini variable make NFL mandatory equals 1. Okay, with that, we've covered a number of security features that are important to mention. And I see there were plenty of questions piling up here in this chat tool.
There's a lot.
May I ask for the supporting folks here, like Tim, have you come across any interesting questions?
Yeah, sure. So lots of stuff around passkeys. People are really enthusiastic about that. So do users need a Notes ID if you're going to authenticate them with passkeys?
Maybe you want to take that one?
They need a person document so we can look up information for that user, but they do not need an ID file.
Fantastic. And another question along that sort of line is, can people have more than one passkey to authenticate with?
Yes, that is a common configuration. What we've been seeing in our internal deployment is most people will have 2 or 3 passkeys because they'll have one on that's shared between their Mac device and their iPhone. They'll have another one from Windows, and they might have a third if they have like an Android phone or a YubiKey or something like that.
Brilliant, thanks, Dave. And if somebody loses one of their passkeys or loses the passkey they use, if they've only got one, can they still log in with username, password, TOTP, all that kind of good stuff?
That depends on how the internet site is configured. If it's configured to allow username, password authentication and passkey authentication, then yes, they can fall back to using username, password.
Fantastic. Somebody asked, is passkeys available on Android devices? I see that you've already answered that one in your last answer. And then there's starting to get some information or some questions around SAML and OIDC. So let me just get one of the really good questions around OIDC.
Oh, let me just make one more comment about the passkeys and supporting devices. The smartphone that you already have has a very, very, very good chance of already supporting passkeys, unless you're running one of those very old devices that have buttons, you know. But anyway, give it a try.
Yep, I can't find that question now about OIDC. Unless Daniel can see it. So there's a lot of questions about local system accounts as well. So I'll just try and summarize that in one question, which is, from an HCL point of view, is it still supported to use a local system account for Domino?
Yes, it is. Want to make some comments? I think we have Daniel on the call. I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself or if you're only monitoring the Q&A. Yeah, he may be stuck on mute. So, oh, by the way, I found.
Yeah, I'm stuck on mute, and I was answering all the questions. So the local service account is really the recommended account to use, but you can switch back if you really want to. But this is not recommended because it is reducing the attack surface on your Domino server, and it's really a best practice that is now enforced. It was possible before, manually, but now it's part of the installer and configured by default.
Okay, thank you. I think I found the OIDC question. If I may read it out loud. Can OIDC be used to federate nodes client logins?
Not in 14.0, but that is something we are looking into.
And there was a lot of questions around what can we use passkeys for. So can we use them for Nomad? Can we use them for notes? Can we use them for everything else that we do on the Domino server?
Well, for now, passkeys are a form of authentication, as Dave said in the very beginning, to perform HTTP-based authentication, web-based authentication. You can not yet log into the Nodes client using passkeys, but of course that is something we're looking into. Dave, I think you can add more if you want.
Yeah, passkeys are based on the WebAuthn protocol, which is largely implemented in modern web browsers and sort of web browser frameworks. So it is supported for web authentication, for HTTP authentication in 14.0. But as I mentioned before, we are looking at ways to leverage that across non-web protocols in the future through various tricks that I'm not at liberty to discuss yet.
Awesome,
Okay.
Good stuff. And one last question, because we're almost out of time. Is Domino 14 now FIPS compliant / certified?
So
FIPS
is not a, yep, so FIPS 140-2 or FIPS 140-3 are not certifications for applications. They are certifications for cryptographic libraries. And the version of the OpenSSL 3 library that we use has a FIPS provider that is FIPS certified. And we will use that FIPS certified provider for everything that we can. So your AES encryption, your SHA hashing, your larger key RSA operations, elliptic curves, et cetera, et cetera.
Brilliant.
So yes, we have a FIPS 140 certified cryptographic library within Domino.
You have to use it. That's the topic. That's the point here. You have to configure Domino accordingly, and you need to make sure that it's done right. Just using v14 alone may not be enough. Oh, I see more and more questions come in.
Yeah, we'll have to end the webinar at some point, Thomas. We could stay here all day and answer lots and lots of questions. So we'll answer the questions that we do have offline if we haven't answered them already. Thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. It's been great to read them all. Really technical, really good questions. Thomas, I believe you have some wrap-up stuff, right?
Yes, I need to announce the next webinar, which is next week. Our colleague Trevor is going to talk about same-time meetings and chat. That's, yeah, as I said, in a week from now. Please join that, whether you use same-time or not. It's certainly of interest to see what's evolved in this platform and what you can do with it. There is another teaser slide here for a webinar that our friends from OnTime are going to do with Endo Manby. It's a webinar about the free version of OnTime, the OnTime calendar product that we introduced with Domino. And that's on February the 1st. The QR code here leads directly to the sign up page. So please join that as well. This was a little bit of an advertisement for the upcoming webinars, so I hope you will stay with us for the next sessions in the series. Hope we'll be seeing or hearing you again next week. And with that, I can only leave you with this wonderful picture as a closing slide saying Domino forever. So thanks for attending this webinar and speak to you next week.